Welcome back in, everybody, to another edition here of both the Auburn Undercover podcast and Roll Pod at Bama 247. My name is Nathan King, joined here today by Cody Goodwin of Bama 247. Got a crossover podcast today. Obviously, we thought it was a deserving occasion. SEC regular season basketball games don't get any bigger than what we've got coming up on Saturday in Tuscaloosa at 3 p.m. Central Time. You already know at this point, it is the Iron Bowl of basketball, and the year's first edition is number 1 Auburn and number 2 Alabama. And so me and Cody are going to chop it up and see what we can get into in terms of a preview of this game from both sides. And Cody, thanks for doing this, and excited to jump into it. I guess, I'll start by asking what the vibe is there. It's going to be college game day in town this weekend. The buildup for this game is number 1s and number 2s don't come around very often in the regular season of college basketball. And then I can just imagine that atmosphere is going to be just unbelievable on Saturday afternoon.
Well, first off, glad we were able to do this, because I know we kind of touched on it a little bit during football season, where you and I were kind of excited to see where these two teams were going to be. And at that point, late November, like the season had kind of already started. And so it's like, all right, like what's, this could be a pretty fun, special basketball season for both these schools. So glad that we're able to kick this off and have a really good time here with both of our shows and both our websites. Too, man, I tell you what, I'm going to do the bad podcasting thing where I'm going to spin this and ask you a question in response to your question. You're from down here, man. Like, you're from the South. I'm from Middle America. When's the last time the Iron Bowl, Alabama and Auburn, the basketball teams or the basketball programs kind of dominated the talking points, right? Because I feel like this is football country, right? Like SEC, it just means more, and we can get into the conversation of the SEC climbing out of the basketball depths and becoming the premier conference in the sport. But man, I feel like ever since I've been down here, it's been football, 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 football. Oh yeah, by the way, there's hoops over there. But it seems like this week, and it's probably a product of this game and this matchup and what these two programs have been doing, they've taken center stage. And I find that to be really cool. Has that ever happened before? I feel like this is pretty new territory.
It's new territory for both of these to be doing it at the same time. And like you said, I think that is a product of where the SEC is now. Like, and you look back at Alabama, and obviously Alabama, both listeners, Auburn and Alabama listeners know that, Alabama's got a great basketball history. One of the more, you look at wins and tournament appearances, all that, one of the more successful programs in the league. You can't say that for Auburn. Auburn has had some highs every once in a while. But for the, aggregate part of their history, it's been very, very bad. And so I think the fact now that in the state, you've never seen two teams, both Auburn and Alabama, reach these heights at the same time. Obviously, from the fact not only that it's number 1 versus number 2, but I think a lot of it goes back to, Bruce Pearl's the longest tenured coach in the SEC now. And I think his rise at Auburn sort of gave reason for other programs to say, hey, if you hire a really good coach and you have investment, then you can get to that same level. Obviously, it feels like Auburn and Alabama now are kind of at their peaks. I know both teams went to a Final Four, and maybe you would argue that was their peak, but like in terms of regular season success and just looking like a wagon, both right now for these two teams might be their peak. And so, I think a lot of credit goes to Nate Oates in that talking point, because Alabama doesn't rise up to Auburn's level. And in some cases, when it comes to championships won and wins and all that and tournament appearances, in some cases, obviously they've surpassed Auburn in some regards. And so I think you've got almost this healthy tug of war between the two sides, and it goes to recruiting. It goes to the fact where you're seeing Alabama fans on Twitter take victory laps over the fact that Auburn is not going to have a standalone practice facility. And they're like, yeah, we're going to have one, and they're not, it's coming down to those little things. And I think there's sort of this national perception, and it's correct, of like Auburn and Alabama fans are just insane when it comes to basketball. And I just think that is the culmination of so many things coming together over the years. And it's all in the name of a healthy program and success. And I think dating back, what you and I talked about before we got rolling, like dating back before Nate Oates came, they had some tournament appearances here and there, but like there were things they could point to that was happening at Auburn, and they were like, man, we want that. And then Nate Oates comes, and there's some things that start happening at Alabama when you're talking about, recruiting is the big part of it, pulling in just, tons of blue chip prospects. And Auburn does the same thing. but Alabama starts winning some championships. And so there's almost that pressure back on Auburn to deliver again. And now you've sort of reached the unstoppable object and immovable force right now, but between these two teams, where it's the highest ranked game, not only in their history, but in the history of SEC basketball. And so, I mean, yeah, I don't ever recall a time. Obviously, I'm only 26 years old, but talking to Jason Caldwell, who works with us over at Auburn Undercover this week, I mean, he was saying there's never been build up to a game that's felt like this between Auburn and Alabama, and we can only hope it's going to be the same when they meet at the regular season. We can only hope that maybe, I don't know. I mean, could you imagine? I mean, I know Duke UNC was awesome when they met in the Final Four, but like, obviously you and I being right up next to these teams, I mean, could you imagine if we get this again, like in a Final Four? I mean, I think it's definitely got that potential, and because both these teams have been so impressive so far this year.
It's funny you mentioned the whole like iron sharpens iron aspect. Nate Oates was hired, March 27th, 2019. And Auburn fans will know that date because it's a few days after they beat Kansas and a few days before they knocked off UNC and Kentucky to reach their school's Final Four. And so I haven't really found a quote yet where Nate talked about like if he was paying attention to that. I imagine he probably was, right? Because he's a basketball junkie, right? He, I think his story is pretty well told right now, at least in Alabama circles, but like he just loves the game. He has respect for the game. And so I'm wondering, hey man, like welcome to Alabama. By the way, our hated rival across the state, are you paying attention to what they're doing? And so like you talk about the idea of like these schools applying pressure to one another. They've both been to Final Fours. They both have won SEC tournaments. They both have won regular season crowns. Like, this is a story that I want to write, but like, asking Nate, like, hey man, like, did that just kind of heighten the pressure immediately when you first got here? Right. And we've seen the results since then from both sides. And so it's been really cool to see, both of these programs rise, just to see the intensity of the games. Like the one basketball season I've been down here, they split. So we've loosely joked about them potentially playing 4 times this year. So it's been kind of fun to get to see these things up close. And man, I tell you what, I'm excited for Saturday, man. I'm excited that it's an afternoon game. It's going to get the ESPN1 treatment, and where I imagine it'll pull a pretty good number. And I'm excited to kind of see the rest of the nation have their eyes on a game like this.
I was thinking about this too. I mean, this will be, because Duke UNC, their first meeting, and that's, there's been other really good games this season, but it was a blowout, and UNC is not that good. This will be probably the most viewed game of the year. I will be interested to see the numbers. Like, it probably won't be close. I mean, I can't imagine like what other game this regular season, because even if you're a, outside observer of not even like college basketball, but like college sports period, you're like, oh, Auburn, Alabama. And then you see like, oh my gosh, they're the number 1 and number 2 teams in the country. Like, I mean, like me personally, my parents went to Alabama. Like, I can guarantee you this will be, they probably watch 1 or 2 basketball games a year. I guarantee this will be one of them. I think not just from the fan base perspective, like if you're a casual observer of college sports, you're probably going to make sure to tune into it. Like you said, it's, I read that it was not a mistake, obviously, by the SEC to have these games on Saturdays. That was something that, like, both sides, I mean, from a coverage perspective and wanting these games to get their spotlight over the last several years, that was something I had kind of like rolled my eyes about, is that I remember that game a couple years ago. Auburn goes there. It's the Brandon Miller Alabama team, and Auburn's up by 17 in that game. Bama comes back. It was just an incredible atmosphere, an incredible game. I think Bama clinched the regular season with that win, and it just didn't feel like it had the punch that you would have if you set it up to be like a Saturday matinee. And so, yeah, really, really excited. I think one last thing I'll say about these teams applying a lot of pressure on each other. By the way, I think I said immovable force and unstoppable object. By the way, those are backwards.
Hey, I know what you meant though. It works.
That's all that matters. That's all that matters. Looking back on this offseason in particular, there was a lot of talk about Alabama having the best roster in the country. Like, that was something I heard over and over again. It's the reason why they were picked to win the league. I'm not saying Auburn's roster construction had anything to do with that, but it doesn't hurt to have that sort of light pressure from across the state. It doesn't hurt to have your bitter rival doing what they were doing and saying, hey, we're loading up for an SEC championship. What do you got? And Auburn obviously did a great, as we've seen it sort of come to fruition now through 11 SEC games, Auburn did a great job of reloading on its own. And so, yeah, I mean, I'm excited to get into this matchup. I am interested to see what you are going to say from an Alabama perspective on like the weaknesses of this team and like maybe where they can be attacked. Cause like people ask me that, and I think people get surprised by what I say about Auburn, and they're like, dude, like I was talking to somebody the other day, to Tom Green on our network. We were talking about the Oklahoma game, and I was like, yeah, I think Auburn's got like a really good rebounding advantage in this game. They'll probably they can get out to a pretty good lead if they can just control the glass. And he was like, dude, if Auburn shows up, they're going to win by 20. And I'm like, when we're so close to these great teams right now, I think it's difficult for us to just like immediately say, oh yeah, they're so much better, they're going to kill them. Like you're closer to the flaws, you're closer to the weaknesses, which everybody has, even when you're number 2 and number 1 in the country. So I guess that would be my first question to you. Alabama looks so much like a juggernaut on offense. Looking at the numbers yesterday, they are really improved on defense. I know they get a bad rap on that side of the court, but you look at their defensive efficiency numbers, and they have really been able to ratchet them up this season. Interested to hear from you whether that's led to them winning some basketball games. But what are some areas that right now Nate Oates is saying, hey, we got to get better at this, and maybe something that is a little bit of cause for concern when Auburn comes in on Saturday?
Honestly, like the things that Alabama kind of, I don't know, like the issues, I suppose, that you could say are a little bit like self-inflicted, right? Like it's effort on defense, right? Like I don't know that they have put together a full 40 minutes of good defense. We have seen 36 minutes of good defense. We have seen 30 minutes of good defense. We have seen 20 minutes of elite defense here and there. And when you have an offense that is as good as and efficient as Alabama, sometimes 20 minutes of elite defense is really all you need. Like we saw it the other night when they went to Austin and just, they shot the leather off the ball, like 62% from the floor, 60% from 3. They gave up close to 50 points in the second half. But like when you hit 17 3-pointers, it really doesn't matter, right? Like they've had a few games like that, but defense has really, it's an effort thing for Nate, right? Like when you ask Nate, like, hey, like, how do you improve the defensive efficiency? He will say like, it's a matter of want to, right? And I think last season there wasn't a lot of want to because they were so consistently efficient on offense, right? Like they had like 9 or 10 100-point games last year. Like they were going to score 90 to 100 points every time out. And so they were kind of like, oh, we don't really need to play defense a ton. This year, it's been kind of, coming in like, yeah, they can still put up 90 or 100 points. Like I think, Tuesday's game against Texas was their 7th 100-point game, their 4th in SEC play. Like the offense is still there, but I think Nate has really impressed on these guys that, hey, like think back to the Brandon Miller year when they won the regular season, they won the SEC tournament, they were the number 1 overall seed in the NCAA tournament. Like that had their offense was good that year. Their defense was great. Like, and that's kind of what he's trying to impress on these guys. Like, hey man, like we have figured the offense thing out. We are going to figure it out over the course of the year. And we have seen that, right? They started a little slow shooting the ball, especially from deep. They have rounded into form now that they're 11 games into the SEC schedule. But the biggest thing for Nate, and it's been this way since the beginning, is just where's the defensive effort? Can you just get in front of these guys? Can you just play defense? It's a matter of effort. And so there's that. And the other thing is turnovers. Like this is just, it's a really weird thing. But I guess when you play as fast as Alabama does, sometimes you're just going to be a little careless with the ball. I think they've been probably a little bit too careless for Nate's liking. They have a couple of games this season with 20 plus turnovers. I think they're averaging like 13 turnovers a game. It's not great, right? And especially coming into a matchup like this, if you're going to give the other team extra possessions, Auburn maybe doesn't play a ton of possessions per game, but they are incredibly efficient with those possessions, right? So you can't give a team like Auburn or some of these other teams that Alabama and Auburn are probably have their eye on when it comes to, okay, second weekend, potentially Final Four weekend of the NCAA tournament. Like you can't give those teams extra possessions. You might be able to score 100 points, but if you give up extra possessions here and there, like you're probably going to be giving up 90, and now you've got a tight game in the final 4 minutes, and it's like, okay, like can you make enough plays there to win it, right? So that's probably the biggest thing, like effort on the offensive glass, effort defensively, and then just a really weird turnover thing. Like they turned the ball over 17 times against Texas, and if they weren't shooting the leather off the ball, that game's probably a lot closer than it was. If they take care of the ball, like they're probably run away and win that game by 30, 35 points. So those are probably the biggest things, like what could ultimately take down this Alabama team: turnovers, offensive glass, and just defensive effort. As if they can take care of those things, not even at an elite level, just largely at a good level, they're a really, really tough team to beat.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of that involved for if you're if you're a great team, because you have built up so much of a baseline of success. And like when Auburn lost last weekend at home to Florida, Florida came in, and that's the best I've ever seen an opposing team play offensively against a good Auburn team in Neville. Auburn's had some rough years going back. With the COVID year was not great for them. And then like before they started winning SEC championships, really ever since they started getting rolling with Bruce Pearl, I have never seen a team come in and play that well on offense like Florida did. And you kind of tip your cap, but then you get later next week, the following week, and Bruce Pearl's talking about some of the effort stuff that they were missing on defense. And so that's always sort of there. I mean, the matchup for me that I really look at in this one, in terms of Auburn needing to improve and be better, is you mentioned Bama's kind of ferocity on the offensive glass. And that is something that has been a struggle sometimes for Auburn this season. 16th nationally right now, Alabama is an offensive rebounding percentage. I can't pull the stat right now, but I saw there's like, I think they've already offensive rebounded 13 or more, or excuse me, 10 or 13 or more times in 10 games. And their points per game jumps up like 5.5 when they hit 13 offensive rebounds. And it's like, you're just not, when they score 94.5 points per game, like you're just not going to win that game. Auburn, on the other hand, had some struggles on the defensive glass. Both of these teams are better on the offensive glass than they are on the defensive glass. Like both of these teams are going to go in and fly and attack and try to get extra possessions. And then, like you mentioned, I think both of them maybe have a little bit of struggles of like just boxing, not necessarily just boxing out, but I think sort of expecting to start going the other way. And for Alabama, I mean, I think it's even more important, talking about Alabama having such a high tempo. It is so important for Auburn to clean up some of these offensive looks, because I mean, Alabama, it's almost like a turnover, at least when I've watched Alabama, like it's almost like a turnover when they can just create transition out of nowhere, like get a defensive rebound and they got a 2-on-2 and they're like, no, this is we're creating a transition opportunity out of this. Auburn had a team like that like 6 or 7 years ago with Jared Harper and Bryce Brown, where it was like, no, our guards are so fast and we are so aggressive. And so I think getting some offensive rebounds is going to be really key for Auburn in this game. But you know, the headliners in this one are the fact that Auburn and Alabama both have their SEC Player of the Year candidates back. You know, two of the best players in the country, and in Janai Broome and Mark Sears. I am interested to hear from your perspective on what Sears has done this season. I know there was that weird thing that if we all hadn't seen it on TV, it's one of those things like it wouldn't have been such a big deal, except cameras and TV exist and everybody was there at the arena watching it. It looks like he's really, really bounced back from that game. What has Mark Sears done well this season? And I guess that Alabama backcourt as well, because it seems like they've got a lot of really, really interesting and talented pieces that have complemented him well this year.
Well, let's address the LSU thing right off the top, right? So Mark did not play in the second half of the LSU game. Alabama ultimately won that game. I believe it was like 80 to 73. But yeah, the story there was that Mark did not play in the second half at all. He was held scoreless. I say held scoreless, right? Because when you don't play for 20 minutes, you know, not going to have a lot of opportunity. But he did not score a point for just the third time in his college career. And he had a game earlier this year when Alabama beat Illinois, like 100-87. That game was in Birmingham. He did not score then, but this was a little different, right? In that game against Illinois, he saw that Alabama's depth had kind of found a rhythm on the floor without him. And he told Nate, he's like, look, like, let the guys go run. We're going to win this game. We're fine. I don't need to play. In this game, Nate put him on the bench. Nate basically said, look, man, like, we need you to do the things that it takes to win basketball games, which is effectively like, Alabama fans know all about Nate's blue collar point system thing, where he tracks effort plays. He assigns point values to offensive and defensive rebounds, steals, forcing extra passes, forcing missed shots, forcing tough shots, things of that nature. So just extra hustle plays that help teams win basketball games, right? So he has that system, and Mark just wasn't playing up to that standard in the first half of that game. And so Nate, who is revealing himself to be more and more like Nick Saban, I think. At least, that's the Alabama listeners will probably appreciate that, and some of the old heads will probably giggle at that. But it's true, right? He's not afraid to coach his players hard, and especially his star players hard. So by sitting Mark, it's like, hey, man, like, you're an All-American. You're a Player of the Year candidate. I need more from you. So that was the first message. The second message by sitting Mark is basically to everybody else saying, look, man, I'm not afraid to sit that guy. Like, everybody needs to step it up a little bit. And so we've seen that from Mark. We've seen that from Alabama as a whole. They have ripped off, 7 straight wins coming into this game, right? They went to Kentucky, had a big win. They went to Mississippi State, had a big win. They toughed out a really close game. Probably shouldn't have been as close against Arkansas. We saw what they did to Texas on Tuesday night. So, I mean, since then, Mark has kind of return to that All-American form, the not quite 20 points a game, but pretty damn close to 20 points a game offensively. But also, like, you're seeing a lot more effort defensively. And really, like, Mark did the NBA combine off-season thing where, you go, you get feedback. You don't have to necessarily declare for the draft, but, hey, what do I need to work on? What's my status like? That type of thing. And the thing that consistently came back for him was, dude, you got to be better defensively, right? Like you need to it's an effort thing. You got to be able to put your hand in their face. You got to be able to just make them work and that type of thing. He just wasn't good about that last year. He has been better about it this year, but I think what Nate wants from him is just consistency, right? Like I just need some consistent high level effort on the defensive end. And we've seen that more and more since, the benching. Yeah, man, Mark he's been playing really well lately. He was, they didn't necessarily need his 20 points a game against Texas. I think he only finished with 18, but he only made like a couple of 3-pointers because the offense was just humming that night. But, he's the de facto leader of this team. They kind of go as he goes. The offense is kind of built around, not just him, but really that backcourt as a whole, which, you also asked about the backcourt. There's Mark, obviously. There's also Chris Youngblood, right? He was a USF transfer, Tuscaloosa native. He was a conference player of the year last year. He started the season hurt with ankle injury, and now he's kind of worked his way back into the rotation, and really through the last few games has really become, kind of a much needed leadership presence on this team. He's returned to the starting lineup, which is kind of where we all thought he would be, in the preseason. He's been very, very good, not just shooting the ball. I mean, I don't want to say he's near automatic from 3, but he has a really pretty shot. You look at the rest of the backcourt. I know that one name obviously need to bring up, Aiden Holloway. That guy's probably the best 3-point shooter in SEC play thus far to this point. But yeah, you can just tell that there's a different level of confidence with him since he's been part of the Alabama program. He's been really, really fun to watch. Somebody said the other day that he just, I hate to say this, but like I can't not see it now that I do see it. But like he's got a Steph Curry-like shot. He's not Steph Curry. That'd be rude. Like I don't want to do that to the kid. But like just the way he shoots on the way up, like it's a very pure shot. It's a lot of fun to watch. And he normally comes off the bench, right? So like he's usually playing against other teams' twos, which is probably helping him look as good as he is. But he has been an absolutely crucial part of that backcourt for Alabama. And, he really gives them some juice off the bench too, right? So like if Mark starts slow, if Youngblood starts slow, if they can't get LeBaron Philon going, you've got this dude that's, I think, 50% from deep in SEC play to come off the bench and provide a spark for the offense. He's been a very, very key part of what Alabama's been able to do this year and a great addition to what's always a really good backcourt, but especially this season, it's been really fun to watch those guys go to work.
Yeah, Auburn fans obviously recognize him and Philon as well. I mean, you have to separate a couple schools back, but he was one time committed to Auburn, then was committed to Kansas, I believe, and then wound up with Alabama. At the end of the day, he is somebody. I saw him play in Mobile 2 years ago. Goodness, it might have been 3 years ago now. 6'2", really skinny, still developing. I believe he's a junior maybe at that. Yeah, he's probably a high school junior. And to see his sort of body develop into that of like an NBA guard is really, really cool. He is probably, I've seen Mark Sears play, like I've seen Aiden Holloway play, I've seen Grant Nelson play. That is the one guy, like I'm really excited to see him in person on Saturday, just because obviously he was an Auburn guy that we followed so closely in his recruitment. Yeah, I mean, for Auburn fans listening, I mean, the Aiden Holloway thing has worked out for him in that Alabama system really, really well. You mentioned his 3-point shooting. Bryson Gooden from Oklahoma is above him ever so slightly, but Holloway's still shooting 50% in SEC. I mean, 50% in SEC play. For an Auburn perspective, Miles Kelly is 40.3% in SEC play, and that's really, really good. And Aiden Holloway has been even better than that. And so, yeah, I mean, catching a few of their games here and there, it seems like they use him, like you said, really, really well when it comes to the bench. That backcourt matchup I think that, and I'm interested to hear your perspective on like what, if anything, slows down Alabama's 3-point shooting other than like just when they don't make shots. And I think Auburn is an interesting matchup for them because of and Auburn's not perfect defensively. This is not the best defensive team Pearl has had. It is a team that plays, like you mentioned with Alabama, it is a team that plays its best when they lock in on defense. And that probably goes for most teams. But when you've got a guy like Denver Jones who's like, no, I'm a sit down and play on ball defense point guard. Miles Kelly has some good size. Chad Baker-Mazara is like 6'7", really long wingspan, just going to be kind of a pest on defense. Todd Pettiford's a freshman. He's learning how to play defense better. You mentioned the bench. That's former five-star Auburn guard versus former five-star Auburn guard. When Pettiford and Holloway go up against each other, and they're both just fearless scorers, that's going to be really, really fun. From a three-point shooting perspective, though, this is an Auburn defense that is pretty solid in that regard. Like I did a story where I was kind of matching up the statistics for each team, and I think you would give Auburn the edge on paper because their three-point defense is really good. But I ended up saying it was an even matchup. Like Auburn's 30th in the country in three-point defense. I ended up saying it was an even matchup because even though Alabama shoots 139th in the country in three-point percentage, it's like the reason that does not tell the whole story is because they are not going to stop shooting threes just because they are not making them. They are going to hit their going of threes. They take 30 threes a game. We've known this for a few years now from Nate Oates in this system. Like they're going to barrage shots from the outside. There's no such thing as a bad look if you are in fact open. You're watching them against Texas. It's like when Grant Nelson was making a three in transition, and I know Jaron Stevenson had it, it's like you're toast. Like, I mean, there's just nothing you can do. But when they have maybe been slowed down from the three-point arc this season, if there is a trend to find, what have you seen from opposing teams, from opposing perimeter defenses? Is it limiting transition? Is it playing aggressive on defense on the perimeter? How can Auburn keep this from being, sometimes you look up and Alabama just drops 105 at home and it just kind of feels like they're going through the motions? How can Auburn keep that from being the case?
The first answer that comes to mind is exactly what Auburn is good at, and that is kind of limiting possessions, right? That's forcing turnovers. That is finding a way to jump in front of an errant pass. Like I had mentioned, just the turnover issues that Alabama, like it's clearly a thing, right? And I think that's Auburn is in a unique position to probably take advantage of that because just the tempo that they play with is so much slower. And so I don't want to say slow it down and turn it into a mud fight, but like you look at when Alabama lost to Ole Miss, like they had 21 turnovers, yes, but also Ole Miss just slowed it all the way down and they weren't taking shots until there were 5-6 seconds left on the shot clock. And they limited possessions for Alabama. You look at when they went to Purdue and they lost, and I know Mackey Arena is a really hard place to play, but in addition to, sometimes the three-point shooters getting run off the line, Purdue slowed it all the way down and Alabama just didn't get as many possessions as they normally do. And so you look at the tempo of these two teams, right? This is from KenPom. Alabama averages 74 possessions per 40 minutes. That's number 2 in the country in terms of tempo. Auburn averages 68. That doesn't sound like a lot less, but you go from number 2 in the country at 74 to 131st in the country. So like Auburn's very good about slowing it down, letting him kind of, playing their style of ball. I know that I feel like the easiest thing to say about this matchup is like whichever team is able to kind of enforce their will on the other more is going to win. Like there's going to be a lot that's going to happen over the course of 40 minutes. But in terms of trying to halt, because Alabama loves to get out and run. They love to play in a rhythm. They love those transition shots. They love those fast breaks, right? If Auburn can slow it down and kind of play their game a little bit more and limit possessions and take advantage of the turnovers and really make Alabama pay, that's where I think Auburn can find a lot of success in this game. I feel like I've been talking a lot. I feel like I need to tee you up and like let you cook about Auburn a little bit. I wanted to circle back to a point that you had made earlier about like Alabama making all these moves in the portal. They brought in the number 2 ranked recruiting class, just a lot of noise about the roster of this Crimson Tide team. And we actually had an interesting conversation not too long ago. I say we, the Alabama media contingent, when Auburn was just beating the brakes off of people, like I think near the end of their non-conference schedule and then kind of the beginning of SEC schedule. And I forget which one of us posed the question, but we were just like, are we so wrapped up in the Alabama bubble, or we're so wrapped up in just the way that this team came together and we're really close to the program day in and day out, that we just didn't notice what was going on over at Auburn? Or did we like, is Auburn like underrated? Like when you look at this team and kind of how they came together, like what maybe it impresses you about just the construction of the team, or did you guys expect them to be as good as they have been this year? Because you look at, you compare their resumes, like we can compare advanced stats all day, but you compare resumes, like Like, I don't know that anybody has a better resume in the country than Auburn. And that's, we all kind of look up and it's just like, oh man, like they won another big game. Oh, they piss pounded another team. Like what is it about this team that has impressed you just in terms of construction and the way that they have found a way to play together?
I think that's a really like apt and good anecdote, excuse me, from you about like the way Auburn went about things maybe flew under the radar. And I don't think they hated that at all. Now, it was impossible for Janai Broome coming back to be under the radar, of course. But that was just to kind of give some history going back to 2 off seasons ago. It was actually less dramatic for Auburn getting him back this year than it was 2 years ago. This year was very clear when he was an All-American toward the end of the year. Extremely clear. And if you read between the lines what Bruce Pearl said down the stretch last year, NIL focus, it was like, no, they're getting that guy. Like they absolutely made him their number one priority. And now you can sort of see why. Is like they sort of thought they could branch everything off of him. 2 years ago, he went to the G League Combine. He was really good there. And it was like I hate to say surprising. He's like player of the year candidate. Like he's a good player, but like NBA stuff, maybe he didn't have. It's like he's not a prototypical 5. He's not a prototypical 4. And so I think we were maybe a little surprised that he was so good at the G League Combine. Then he gets an invite to the NBA Combine, and the reports are coming in that he's turning heads there. And like Auburn's like sweating bullets. Like, are we about to lose this guy right away? So it's almost a little more stressful for them going back 2 years ago. He got some like late second round buzz, but they were able to bring him back. This time around, massive priority, made sure he was taken care of with NIL. That's sort of where things started. But in terms of everything else, I think it was kind of under the radar. They did not land splashy transfers, and they wanted to. That was not for lack of trying. They lost Jalen Williams, who was a fantastic veteran for this team for so long, played 5 years at Auburn, ended up being the winningest player in program history, all SEC guy at power forward. They wanted to replace him with they brought in Dylan Mitchell, who went to Texas. I think he ended up at Cincinnati. Like they spent their NIL on Broome and taking care of their returning roster. They weren't able to get a guy like him. Duke Miles ends up at Oklahoma. He's their backup point guard. Auburn wanted him to be the point guard to come in and complement JP Pegues. JP Pegues was their biggest transfer. That was like, this is their number one guy. They think he can be just the point guard to run things. Because obviously Holloway was gone. Trey Donaldson went to Michigan as well. So it was a full reset at point guard. JP Pegues doesn't play. JP Pegues does not play. He is not in this rotation. He came from Furman. You kind of feel for the guy. It's his last year, like at the college level, and Auburn has such a good hit rate on transfers, but like every once in a while, it's just not gonna work out. Tahad Pettiford is a 5-star, but I don't feel like it was like a ton of buildup for him necessarily, because they knew he was going to come off the bench. He's turned into obviously a really good player. I think for Auburn, the fact that the roster construction worked so well is that it was all about returning pieces. And it was all about the thought experiment of, can these guys take a second-year jump? Because there are a lot of transfers who were here last year for their first season. Denver Jones comes over. He's a guy who I know was a little bit interested in Alabama. Denver Jones comes over. He plays an interesting role in his first year. Now he has taken a step further. He's a better offensive player. He's a better defender. He's their starting point guard. Chad Baker-Mazara is a guy who comes off the bench last year, really high energy X factor, but like not great at any one area. He's really stepped up on defense. He's their second most efficient scorer. Check that box off as well. Chaney Johnson is like, we might talk about matchup stuff later, like X factor, like pound that into people's heads. He is a huge X factor for this team because we talked about the power forward spot and they didn't end up getting a high level transfer. And so they kind of looked at Chaney and they were like, all right, dude, like it's you got to step it up and be better. Offensively, he has been maybe the most improved player on the entire team this year besides Janai Broome, because Broome has been fantastic. And then Miles Kelly kind of fell under the radar. He's been shooting a little bit down the last few games, but Georgia Tech transfer who's just like pure 3-point shooter. Most games they run like curl screen action to get him the first shot of the game because they're like, yeah, he can hit that, and then it kind of gets things rolling. And so, yeah, I mean, I think that's a really interesting way, framing it from y'all's perspective. Like, yes, I think it was almost not the antithesis of what Alabama did, but like Alabama had a lot of flashy additions, big names who were highly rated in the portal, 5-star guys, what have you. Auburn made a big focus on bring back as many returning contributors as possible. Hope they take another step forward. Now, once they started doing that, they started scheduling, and they were like, that's when we sort of knew. Obviously, we didn't know this team was going to be this good. We didn't know this was going to be number 1 overall seed, perspective like that. Obviously, you don't predict that, but we knew once they like scheduled Houston, and once it was like, oh, they're going to go play Duke, oh, they're going to go to Maui, and it was like, Bruce must think this team's pretty good. I kind of, we all kind of got that vibe of like, he's not going to just send them to be lambs to the slaughter in these games. Like, and we kind of just thought, hey, you like split these. Would they play like maybe 8 non-conference quad 1 teams, 7? Like, hey, you go in and split those. Maybe, get one above 500 in those like huge games. Like, you're great. You're going to be potential 1 or 2 seed. Obviously, we didn't expect them to do what they did. Beating Houston, beating Iowa State. Obviously, Duke being their only loss for a long time was like, yeah, like duh. Like everyone, you lose at Cameron. That's just what you do. And so, yeah, I mean, from a roster perspective, really, really interesting. But it all comes back to Janai Broome. He is, and this team was okay without him. They won without him. They won a couple games, and he has not been 100%. And that is a really, really intriguing storyline for this game because Chad Baker-Mazara is also not 100%. I'm not saying there's going to be an asterisk if Alabama wins, because that's not, I mean, like a 90% Janai Broome is better than 99% of players in the country. But it is really interesting to see if he can continue to get healthy. They had a long rest because they played a Tuesday game. Interested to see how Alabama defends him. I mean, from your perspective, I guess I'm wondering about Alabama's front court defense. They have a good bit of size. Alabama does. They are not one of these teams that is smaller in the SEC. I think they've got 3 guys that go above 6'10". Obviously, Cliff Omoyuri is going to be an interesting matchup there. But obviously, Alabama has not seen somebody like Janai Broome. But what do you make of their inside interior defense? Because sometimes Broome just misses shots. Sometimes he puts it up and he's not able to get into a rhythm. But when he is, I mean, they have not lost a game this year, and they've only lost 2 games. They have not lost a game this year, or particularly been close in a game where like he's rolling, teams have to double team him, he's kicking out to open guys. Like that's it. You're not going to be able to keep up with them. Does Alabama have the ability to defend him without double teaming, and how do you think they might go about that?
That's the interesting question, man, because they brought in Cliff Omoyuri, the Rutgers transfer, the big man, for rim protection, right? Like they didn't the thing I like to say about this Alabama team is that they have a lot more buttons that they can press. Last year they had really only like 2 or 3 buttons that they could press, and they were really, really good at that, but they were just kind of limited, right? They kind of lived by the 3 and died by the 3. And we saw at points in the season, during SEC play, I think they won 13 of 15 games at one point. So they were living, and then they lost 4 of 6 at the end of the season and went 1 and done at the SEC tournament, right? So then they were dying, and then they won 4 games to get to the Final Four, and they were living. And then they played UConn, and they played really well in the first half, and then they just kind of ran out of gas because UConn could press a lot of buttons. Alabama could not, right? So this year they can press a lot more buttons, right? For as much as we talk about the 3-point shooting and just what these guys can do on the perimeter, they are incredibly efficient when they decide that they want to go inside. Part of that is because they're able to stretch defenses quite a bit, right? But the other part of that is they have Cliff in the middle, who is, I want to say at one point this season, he was shooting like 90% from right there in the paint, like right there by the rim, which is what they brought him in for, right? Like they wanted to bring him in to add a different element to the offense, but also to bring in a rim protector, right? Like one of the stats that I loved looking up when Cliff had originally committed over the summer was he played at Rutgers, right? Rutgers, about 500 ball or something like that over the last couple of seasons, but routinely top 25 in defensive efficiency by KenPom, like just an absolutely like you were not going to get to the rim with those guys because they had 6'11" Cliff Omoyuri just kind of standing there with his hand in the air saying good luck, right? So that's what they brought him in to do. It hasn't been a seamless transition, right? Because again, Alabama likes to get out and run. He's a big man, like a little bit more traditional big man than a guy that's going to get up and down the floor. So it's taken him some time to fully adjust to Nate Oates' system. I think he's a lot more comfortable now than he would have been earlier in the year. So yeah, like I think you start with him when it comes to, okay, how are they going to defend Janai Broome? But putting Cliff at the 5 allows Grant Nelson to play a little bit more of the traditional 4. He's a lot more comfortable there. They also, when they like to go big, they will put Jaron Stevenson, who routinely starts the game. He doesn't always play 20-plus minutes. He played really well against Texas on Tuesday, career high 22 points, and also had a block. And, really, really fun, intriguing player, right? He's like 6'10", 220. Like he's really, I think, Nate really likes his effort defensively, which is why he continues to start. I'm curious to see, like, can Cliff handle Johni Broome? Can Grant handle Johni Broome? I think we all know the answer to that one, because in the 2 games last year, Johni Broome took Grant to the woodshed and scored, I think, 25 points both times. So that's probably not the answer, but like, I'm very curious to see what Nate decides to try and do defensively, because if you're going to dedicate 2 to 1 guy, Auburn's still pretty, like, we know Auburn's still really, really good offensively. And so who does that open up? Are they able to hit their shots? What are they okay living with? What is that? If they dedicate 2 to Broome, what does that mean for the other 3 guys on the floor? How are they going to do this? So they've got some pretty good defenders that they can bring in off the bench. I know we mentioned Holloway earlier and how he's really, really good shooting the ball, but Nate really praises his defense. Another guy, I mean, you were talking X factor earlier, another X factor that I want people to know, Mo Diabate. Like, that is a guy, if there's a guy on Alabama's roster that will look Nate in the eye and say, put me on him, I'll shut him down, it's Mo Diabate. Like, he just comes in off the bench. He is routinely, I was talking about blue collar points earlier. Whoever has the most blue collar points at the end of their games gets the hard hat, right? Mo D wins the hard hat 8 times out of 10. Like, he's just a guy that's going to come in. He's going to create hustle plays. He's going to go after boards. I don't know if he's going to be able to look at Nate and say, put me on Johni Broome and shut him down, because nobody's been able to do that this year. But can you frustrate him? Can you force him into some tough shots? Can you force him to pass the ball and make somebody else beat you? Auburn's a team loaded well enough that they've got a lot of dudes that can beat you. But yeah, I think what Alabama does with Johni Broome, how they try to defend him, is really one of the bigger questions of this matchup. And I don't know. Like, I don't know the answer. Admittedly, I'm not the, foremost basketball expert, but I'm genuinely very curious to see how Alabama tries to defend this guy. I guess to flip the question back on you, when Auburn's on defense, it's very simple to be like, yeah, find the turnovers, slow the pace down, try to run these guys off the line. But when you look at the way that this Alabama team plays offense, just the number of possessions, the number of shots that they get up, their ability to find shots on the perimeter, but also now they have the added element of going to Cliff or Grant inside. Like, what's the first line of defense? Like, what do you feel like? Like, if you want to make Alabama play left-handed, what's the first thing you try to take away if you're Auburn?
Yeah, I mean, I think it goes back to something Auburn has done really well all season. And assist rate is a finicky stat. Assist rate is not black and white. But I think for Auburn, it tells a decent story of how they like to play defense. They were number 1 in the country most of the season. Currently, they're number 4 in opposing assist rate, opposing assist to turnover. I'm not looking at right now, but they were number 1 in opposing assist to turnover for a long time. And so I think that sort of spoke to, I mentioned Denver Jones earlier. Their mindset is that the combination of Denver Jones and Miles Kelly in the 1 and 2 spots can really just put a lot of effort forth on defense. Like, Bruce Pearl always says, he starts with his best defensive lineup and he closes with his best defensive lineup. He's kind of just thinking like, they've got good players. Like, they're going to find a shot somewhere, and like Johni Broome's on the floor, so like that will open things up. But he sort of leans on defense first and foremost. It's funny, he's such a tangent, but like, he's an offensive coach. Like, that's his thing. Like, that's how he buttered his bread throughout his career. But like, he doesn't think that a team's playing well at all if they're not defending. Like, they could be scoring. I think there's probably some of that with Nate Oates as well. It's like, they scored 95 in a game, but like, there's lack of effort on a close. I mean, he called a timeout against Tennessee when Chaz Lanier hit a 3, and obviously it was a really close game, and then just, tore them to shreds in the bench, to the point where a freshman for them literally left the game and did not come back. Now, that's a little bit of a side story with that guy, but like, it was insane just because they didn't do well, covering a transition opportunity. But yeah, for Auburn, I think it's all starts with that perimeter defense. They do a good job they've described it to us. Cause like, I'm like you, where I'm not like a super like high level basketball mind. I'm just like guy with this job. And so I always ask players and coaches, I'm like, tell me, inform me, act like I'm 5 years old and explain this, because you'll do a much better job of it. The way Auburn players have described their defense this year is it's a lot about trust, because they feel like they can be aggressive. They can sit down and be really pesky on the perimeter, because they're like, what will happen if this guy gets by me? They will go into the paint, where Auburn is number 3 in the country in block shots. And they have Johni Broome and they have Dylan Cardwell, who start for Alabama. By the way, those 2 guys start together now. They play Broome at the 4 to like give those extra minutes, because no longer is it, oh, Johni Broome plays like 26 minutes a game and he's still doing this. They're like, no, we're gonna bump those numbers up. Like, he's one of the 2 best players in the country. We're gonna make sure he plays a lot. And so it's all about trust. It's all about tenacity on defense. Like, again, I point to that Florida game. I mean, you're not going to see a guard play better than Walter Clayton did in that game, and you're not going to see a team shoot better from three on the road than Florida did in that game. But there were some defensive rotations. Like I thought Bruce was going to throw Chad Baker-Mazara out of the game personally because he was slow getting on some 3-point rotations. Their ability to guard 1 through 5 is really important too. Like if I'm Auburn, I don't want to see Mark Sears take Dylan Cardwell off the dribble, but like, is it the end of the world? It's actually like, it's not. Like Cardwell's a really, really versatile defender. I think there was a play in Tuscaloosa last year where Sears got on Broom and actually forced to stop. Like Sears went right at him and Broom was able to defend. So really just versatile defenders. I think you mentioned like, how are they going to shut off Alabama? It's pressing those different buttons. Like you said, this team, and that's, you listen to opposing coaches like Mark Byington did it on Tuesday. Listen through the lines of what opposing coaches say. They talk about how Auburn can just play whatever style. I think at first glance, you would look at Auburn and the way they play and the type of athletes they have, and you'd be like, oh yeah, they're fast. They like to get up and down the floor. It's like, and as you mentioned, like, no, like slow it up. They turn to their top offensive assistant. He calls out whatever. Bruce calls it out. There's 15 seconds left on the shot clock, but they're like, that's fine. It's super efficient offense. And so they do that. That's what they want to do. But if they get into a track meet, like they have guys who can keep up in that regard. And so I think that is what makes them sort of, as you mentioned, maybe uniquely prepared defensively to face Alabama because they can do different things. If the game is going at a super high speed, they have guards that want to get up and down the floor and be able to defend, but it will start with that perimeter defense. Denver Jones had a run, and it obviously did not happen against Walter Clayton. I didn't really go and check the numbers against Vanderbilt, but he had a run going back to like Taman Lipsey and Uzan in the non-conference play where like Braden Smith had his worst game of the entire season against him. He was like 3 of 12 with 5 turnovers and shot like 2 for 10. Like it has been a tremendous commitment for them with perimeter defense. It starts with Denver Jones, starts with Chad Baker-Mazara. I'm not saying Mark Sears is going to go 3 for 10 with 5 turnovers. I think that's probably an impossibility in this game, but they have done a good job of taking the opponent's best offense, taking the opponent's, not even just their best player, but how they like to flow on offense and saying, okay, well, you're not going to do that. So find something else to do. The best example I will point to is they went to Texas. Arthur Kaluma had 34 points on them, like was just banging threes, doing whatever he wanted because they looked at Texas's guards, the really, Traymond Mark and Trey Johnson, and they were like, no, you're not going to do that. Like, you're not going to score that way. They were up by like 15 and it kind of closed and they ended up, closing out the game. And so they do a good job of their defensive scouts are always really impressive. Like you'll talk to them after the game and they'll be like, oh yeah, we knew we had to take away this element of things. And you're like, okay, that makes a lot of sense. Comes from the fact that like, and I'm rambling here, but like comes from the fact that like they have a good coaching core. I think like this group of coaches has been around for a long time. Stephen Pearl and Chad Pruitt have been there a long time. Burgermaster's been there 5 or 6 years. Ira Bowman's been there 5 or 6 years. And so like, there's no surprises when they go into game week. And this one in particular, this reminds me of, and why I think this is going to be such a high level game. And I literally just can't wait for Saturday at 3:00. Like I wish it was here right now. Is that it's like when Auburn played Tennessee and Rick Barnes this year. And Bruce Pearl brought up a good point. He was like, we know Zakai Ziegler. We know Rick Barnes. Like there is no secrets. There are no secrets in this game. That is the same way with Oates and Pearl. And I think these groups of personnel, like, we know what you like to do. You know what we like to do. And it's just whoever is able to shut it off better, whoever is able to go out there and be efficient. And so, I mean, a lot of that comes back to Broom. Like you mentioned, like it will be interesting to see. There's been the past couple games, Todd Golden talked about it and then Byington talked about it. And you're like, okay, this is a trend. Their teams are making him go to his left shoulder. So he's a lefty shooter. Obviously gets in that rhythm where he can just like quickly throw that right shoulder behind, all of a sudden in a great position to put up his lefty shot. Teams are really trying to take that away. He looks a little uncomfortable with it right now. And Vandy and Florida were able to get away with not double teaming him in that sense. And Vandy's really small and they didn't have to double team him a bunch. And so we'll be really interested to see how Alabama defends in that regard. As we're sitting here at about 51 minutes, I guess, was there anything else you wanted to touch on in this matchup? Because I mean, I think we could go all day talking about the intricacies of this. And, there's so many storylines sort of interwoven here, but I just, as I'm sitting here rambling, wanted to make sure there wasn't anything else you wanted to touch on this one.
I'm trying to think, man. We touched on X factors. We touched on, style of play, just the obvious history here that's coming along. I guess the last thing maybe I had, and maybe this is a good way to kind of close the joint show here. what do you think ultimately happens? Like, how do you think this game unfolds? That seems like such a silly question because, like you said, we could be here for hours talking about this game and it may go the total opposite of what we think. But just, you've watched Auburn every single time out this season. I've watched Alabama every single time out this season. Just what do you think is what do you think will happen here? What do you think? How do you think the game's going to unfold?
I'm gonna this week on Friday. I'm trying to round up predictions, and you will be included in this, by the way, if you want to. I'm trying to round up predictions from all our CBS and 24/7 Sports, people to just get as many thoughts as possible on this game. I sent a big email and was like, give me one thought on this game and a score prediction. I'm going against my normal pre-game routine of I usually don't do score predictions, but I knew I would have or predicting a game at all, especially this season, because I think before they played Florida, you could have been, I think Florida comes in here and wins, but it's Auburn's was a 9.5-point favorite. There was no, you were just kind of grasping at straws. And in basketball, it just happens sometimes. In this game, though, it's really, really tough because I do think if this was any other team, if this was any other venue, I'm trying to word this properly. I think Auburn would win this game because I think Auburn matches up well. I think Auburn has a unique ability on defense to have a good matchup here. I think the size of Auburn's front court, the foul discrepancy in this game in Tuscaloosa, I looked it up. It's Alabama shoots 32 free throws in these last 5 meetings in Tuscaloosa. Usually goes Alabama's way, and Auburn kind of struggles in allowing foul shots. But maybe this season with the size, maybe this season with the ability for Janai Varum to just go to work with the way this offense flows better. I think looking at Florida, I said that, and everybody said it, that's a bad matchup. They've got the size, they've got the guard play. They are going to be able to do some things to Auburn, and ended up playing out that way. I think Auburn does match up pretty well with Alabama, but I'm going to stick to what I said in the preseason was that I thought these teams would be, no surprise, not breaking news here. I thought these teams would be good enough to where they would split these two games. I just can't in good conscience look at the fact that we could be playing a very similar game here at the end of the season in March in Neville Arena. I don't know if it'll be 1-2, but very well could be for the SEC regular season title. And I would think Auburn would take care of that game on their home floor. If it was anywhere else, but having been to Coleman now the last 3 years, this game rocks in there. It is, you will not find, other than when Auburn hosts somebody super, super high level, it is just an insane atmosphere in that building. I think there is, and you can touch on this if you want, I think there is a bit of a sense of Alabama wanting to play that complete game at home and wanting to put that together. It seems to me from the outside, they've been better on the road this year. They've kind of had some clunky offensive performances in their home gym. I think wanting to get off the schneid a little bit in that regard for Alabama comes into play. So I think I will ultimately pick Alabama in this game. Would not be surprised. Auburn's the best team in the country, and I think we will end that weekend. I will still think Auburn's the best team in the country after the weekend, which is, what I'm sorry, Alabama fans. I still think Auburn would be the number 1 overall seed. I still think they have the best resume. I'll say that. I think they have the best resume in the country. But Alabama will, I think if they win this game, it'll start to get interesting. Their quad 1 wins will inch a little closer. That number 1 overall seed conversation is just going to be incredible to follow over the last month of the season. But yeah, I'm interested to hear your prediction as well, or kind of your matchup thoughts on this one, because I think it's a good matchup for Auburn. I think there are some things they can take advantage of, but it is going to take in that building, similar to when Alabama will come to Auburn later in the year, it will take a tremendous, tremendous game to win that on the road. And I think these teams are too good to not split. I think they're going to split. And I think right now I would pick both of them to probably win on their home floor.
I agree with that, man. And it is, you hit on it, that Alabama maybe a little lackluster at home, right? You look at their one SEC loss, it was against that Ole Miss team. They had 20 some turnovers and just kind of a blah game overall. They were kind of in that game in the first half, but then ultimately in the second half, the turnovers caught up with them and they just kind of let it get away from them a little bit. But you look at, it's really kind of a product of scheduling, because you look at who they've played at home, right? They beat a pretty good Oklahoma team early in the conference schedule, Vanderbilt, LSU, Georgia. This is kind of the first real true big home game for them this season. And they're going to get juiced for it, right? It's Alabama-Auburn, so it's the Iron Bowl. It is 1 versus 2. it's going to have SEC implications. Like I think I wrote at some point this week that there's the potential that it could have NCAA tournament consequences as well, right? Because, you're looking at resumes and, again, it's mid-February, like nothing is going to be finalized after a game like this, which I think is what's going to make it so much more fun, right? Because it kind of sets, I don't want to say it sets the narrative, but it kind of does for the next 3 weeks, right? Because they're going to do this again in 3 weeks at Neville. And then there's the chance that they could do it again a week after that in Nashville. So it's like, if the winner, you didn't win anything, the loser, it's not the end of the world. And so that's something I think important to keep in mind going in. I think it's going to be a close game the entire way throughout. I would be shocked if either team led by double digits for any long period of time, because both of these teams have the capability to go on runs offensively. I hate to do I'm not a basketball mind, so I can't tell you exactly which matchup's going to decide it, especially in a game like this where there's so many that are ultimately going to decide it. But, I guess I'm hopeful it doesn't get decided until the under 4 in the second half. Like I think it's going to be that close of a game. I think it's going to be that intense. And, whoever I'd like to think that Alabama can take care of business on their floor in the same way that, I think we both probably agree that Auburn can take care of business in the jungle. And I think it's going to be a great game, man. I think it's going to be one of the marquee matchups of the year in college basketball. And similar to you, man, like I wish it was Saturday at 3:00. Like I'm ready to watch this game. I'm ready to see these two teams go at it. And I think it's going to be one of those heavyweight bouts that has the feel of like an Elite Eight, Final Four type game that, hey, like it's whoever wins it is going to have earned it. And I think that's what really makes this matchup really, really exciting.
I think you're going to see the best. Like Auburn's had some, and I will say the reason now, if Auburn was comfortably at the level, and they've been playing great, but like if they were at the level they were at about a month ago, I probably would pick them in this game. And that's not saying that I don't think this team has the makeup to kind of hit a wall and like, oh, they peaked too early. Like when they went to Maui, excuse me, when they went to Maui, I started rejecting the idea of like, oh, this team's peaked too early in non-conference play. Excuse me, terrible timing there. I started rejecting that idea. I'm like, no, they're just too complete. Like maybe they'll lose some SEC games down the stretch and get to like, maybe they won't win the regular season, but like this team will be the same team when they get to March in the tournament. They will have the same capabilities. But it's worth noting that like Janai Broom's not 100%. It's worth noting that Chad Baker-Mazara didn't start against Vanderbilt because he was a little dinged up. Chris Moore, who replaced him in the starting lineup, left late in that game. I'm interested to see Bruce Pearl, and he's not a huge impact player, but he's someone who is in their rotation. And so, like, do they have minor, little injuries to look at for like 3 guys in their rotation? And on top of the fact that their defense against Florida left a little bit to be desired. Their interior shooting, they were a team that could just dump it off the broom and just go. Earlier in the season, their 2-point shooting has kind of hit a wall a little bit. They've shot under 50%. I think 5 of their last 7 games from 2-point range. Before that point, they'd only done that 3 times all season that they had shot under 50% from inside. And so that efficiency, I think, can come back a little bit. But it's like I talked about at the outset. Like I'm grasping at straws here. Like this is the best team in the country. This is the best resume in the country. And I would not be surprised one bit if Auburn wins this game, because I will say this. I expect, as you said, like I'd be stunned if we don't get these teams' best shots. Like I'd be stunned if Auburn's best players are not stepping up to the plate. I'd be stunned if Alabama's best players aren't stepping up to the plate. And so the reason I would not be surprised if Auburn won is because Auburn's best is better than anyone else. We've seen that so far. Auburn's best is better than anyone else in the country. And so if they get that over the course of 40 minutes and are able to stave off some things that Alabama has sort of struggled with sometimes this season, I think they can get this win. But yeah, I mean, I'm not going any sort of like, I thought about it this morning because I knew we would kind of talk about it, like making, going one way or another. It doesn't really matter that much. Like I said, like basketball score predictions, it's just so whatever. Wow, very unfortunate timing here. It's so whatever because like one matchup could go one way or another late in the game. And so that probably is a sign that I've been talking most of this, talking just absolutely rambling on this. And so we're going an hour. It's probably a sign that I need my water cut off. But yeah, I mean, it's going to be a phenomenal game. I can't remember being more excited other than when I was covering the Final Four. Like I cannot remember being more excited for one singular basketball game. And so Hopefully it lives up to the hype. And when you look at the history of 1 versus 2 recently, like it has I think the last 1 versus 2 I read was like Buddy Hield scored the most points ever in Allen Fieldhouse, and Oklahoma won on the road over Kansas. And I'm like, yeah, dude, if we get like a Janai Broom like 30 burger and Auburn wins, I mean, like it has the potential. So many different avenues because these teams are awesome. So many different avenues for this to be a fun game.
Yeah, I think the to put a pin on this conversation, just so you don't like choke and die on air. I think the only thing that would maybe surprise me is if the winner of this game won by like double digits, right? Like, or even like 9 or more points. Like that would be, you know, because you got to factor in some like late game free throws. I could see a team pulling away and winning by like 6, 7, 8 points, whatever. If a team wins by double digits, I think I would be surprised. You know, Alabama is a team that, I said this before, they can press a lot more buttons this year than they could last year. When they are clicking, they are a lot to handle. Even then, Auburn is probably one of 1, 2, maybe 3 teams in the country that even when Alabama is clicking, Auburn is a team that is kind of built to handle a lot of that, or at least match them punch for punch. And I'm excited to kind of see, you know, what happens here, right? Like the team that obviously lands more punches is going to pull away with this. And, you know, it's the first of, you know, I think I first made this joke during the Iron Bowl game in November when we were at Bryant-Denny Stadium. I hope this is the first of 4 meetings this season, because this could be a lot of fun, man. This could be it's already, I think, a pretty special season for both these programs. It's going to end up being, I think, a pretty special season for this state. But if we're able to get 4 Iron Bowl basketball matchups, like that is just going to be like incredible. And I think this, I guess you can consider this the first chapter of what could end up being a really special, month and a half for both of these programs, just with the postseason coming up here before too much longer. So I'm excited, man. Like I can't wait. And, you know, we're going to have to circle back and do this again before their second matchup when they meet again here in a few weeks. So, cause this was a lot of fun, man. I enjoyed chopping it up with you.
Yeah, for sure. I hope both audiences got a little bit out of this. We kind of just wanted to do, I think you and I are both in the same boat. Like I've done preview shows where it's like we do one podcast and you flip around and do your podcast, and it's like we just went for 50 minutes a piece. Why not just kind of put that all together? I think honestly it kind of flows better in the sense of like just like conversation. But yeah, I mean, like you said, this is round 1, and how many rounds is this fight going to go between these teams? What is it going to mean for SEC implications? I mean, I just absolutely cannot wait. Honestly, as we're sitting here recording this on Thursday morning, I can't wait to go talk to Bruce and players today. Like you and I were talking about it yesterday. Like it's going to be like, I'll have to get there an hour early to make sure I have a seat. Like it's going to be crazy. And I think that there's a lot of little interwoven storylines that are going to be fun to follow in this game. If you're a Bama fan wanting to keep track of what's going on at Auburn, head over to auburnundercover.com. If you're an Auburn fan wanting to keep track of what's going on with Bama 247. You were saying yesterday, y'all are going to have Nate Oates on Friday. And so a little bit of an appetizer there if Auburn fans want to get his comments and kind of the Alabama side of previewing things. But both coaches definitely understand the importance of this one. And man, just so excited to get into it on Saturday. Looking forward to seeing you and the rest of the Bama 247 crew. And man, should be a madhouse. Hopefully the lights stay on this time, although that did make for a pretty fun game last year.
Oh, absolutely. So I'm excited, man. This is going to be a lot of fun. Excited to hear what Bruce has to say. Excited to talk to Nate tomorrow. And yeah, man, this is going to be the Auburn Undercover Roll Pod like mixture. Like this was fun, man. This was really cool.
For sure. Hopefully we get treated to a great game on Saturday. Can't imagine it would be anything else. Number 1 Auburn, number 2 Alabama. It's for the number 1 spot in the polls. It's for the number 1 spot in the SEC. We'll see what it has to do with tournament implications later on. Don't go anywhere. Make sure you are watching that game or you are attending that game on Saturday in Tuscaloosa at 3 p.m. Central Time on ESPN. For Cody Goodwin, I am Nathan King. Thank you guys so much for tuning in today to the Auburn Undercover podcast and Roll Pod here on the 24/7 network. And we will talk to you guys soon. Everybody enjoy the game on Saturday.